Hello and welcome to this heavy circle, uplifting black masculinity. This heavy circle is presented by Gifted by Nature in association with Autograph and co-produced by Renaissance Studios, the beautiful studio we're in today. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this, Arts Council and the Cultural Recovery Fund. Thank you very much for sponsoring this space of black masculinity. To give you a little bit of information about how this circle will be going, there'll be an hour and a half conversation between myself and the gentleman here. And then there'll be a Q&A at the end for the audience. Any questions you might have, please pop it into the chat and yeah, we'll touch on those at the end. For right now, I also want to mention our social media hashtags to join the conversation. Hashtag Heavy Circle on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're at. And thank you very much for joining the circle. We look forward to having a great conversation. I'll start, usually what we do is to start these circles, we introduce ourselves by talking about who we are today and how we're feeling today is really the first way to open up. So I'll get going first and nervously talk about who I am today. I think who I am today is very much like an add up from the week just gone. I think it's hard to like isolate just this one particular day for me. So really who I am today is, I'm someone who's very proud of the work that we're doing here, the work that myself and our team have done, everyone who's involved with this, the team at Gifted by Nature, Autograph and Renaissance. I feel very like proud today. I also feel like personally I'm dealing with a lot of changes in my life personally, especially with regards to business and entrepreneurship, which is something that I would love to talk a lot about during the circle. And yeah, I'll pass it on to the next person who's a fusion. I would love to hear who you are today.
Today, I feel like the first page of a brand new journal. You know, I feel like we've had so many of these chapters through lockdown and all of the things that have kept us apart, and we're here together. This feels like one of the first gatherings of new people. Mm-hmm. So excited to be here because of the conversation we've had leading up to this. And I just feel like this will be a momentous occasion. I feel like I'm going to get to know all of your journeys and I look forward to working with all of you. And I just feel a degree of purpose. Like when we've all been in lockdown, I think we've all dived deep into ourselves and discovered some of those dark places that we've had to work through, and also probably reimagine some of the things which we might have let go of, hobbies, passion projects, and just having nurtured some of those and seeing them come to fruition now, it's just like, yeah, I'm ready to write new chapters, write new stories, and yeah, feeling very positive about it.
Amazing. Would you like to pass the potato on to someone else?
The invisible potato of story sharing to come up.
Cool. Who am I today? Today, I am grateful. Like, as Fusion was saying, like it's great to be in the presence of other black men sitting here having a conversation about black masculinity, especially after the time we've been having of, you know, everyone being separated, being in their silos, just trying to stay sane. But I'm also very tired. Like, real talk, I'm very tired. Like, been working all throughout the pandemic, you know, mental health doesn't stop. But yeah, just trying to look after myself, look after my family, keep things going. Yeah. Grateful and tired. I'm gonna pass things over to Michael.
So who am I? I'm a student, that's what I am. I feel ready. Like, I feel like after the whole lockdown period and having nothing to do, just having that peacetime sort of was like getting ready for like war, you know what I mean? So now I feel like ready to go, and I feel ready for the future. Like, I'm very, very optimistic about the future, and I feel like, especially because I'm young, it's only up from here, and I feel like I've done a lot now. I feel like I can say that I've done a lot now. So if I can do so much at this age, what can I do when I'm older, when I have more things ready for me, when I've developed and grown. So I feel ready and energetic and just, yeah. I'll pass over to Cordell.
Today I'm also tired, that's why I lost. I'm also tired physically and emotionally. I feel like I'm very open to change and adaptation at the minute. Also very grateful for just like the opportunity that's come my way over the last like couple of months. And that's it really. I'm just open. I think that to round up all of my emotions, I'd say open.
I love that. Thank you all for sharing. Like, I think one of the key word, I love you said tired. I like it. I think you said tired and like optimistic or something like that.
Tired and grateful.
Tired and grateful. That's it. I love that. That seems like I don't know how everyone else feels, but I feel just like that as well. Actually, like I'm very grateful that we're here. I'm very grateful for life, and cannot deny that it's tiring. I'd like to like stay on that a little bit actually, and relate it to this conversation. For me, the tiredness comes from this reality that life as a black man can feel heavy for many reasons. And I'd love for us to maybe share a little bit about what it is that's heavy for us, that's making us tired at this time, to kind of get that going as well. For me, I think like what I was saying about where I feel in my life with regards to life, I don't like calling it work because it's all one thing. I feel very much like, you know, it's a year since we had the like resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it really kind of took the world by storm a little bit. And during that time, just a little story, I remember when the passing of George Floyd happened, I remember at that time in my life, I felt like it was another black man's life taken by the police. I remember not at that time feeling like it was like, yeah, this is part of the way it goes. And there was someone who kind of was feeling very strongly about it. My partner, she's feeling very strongly about it. And it was actually and she's not black, she's of South Asian heritage. And she actually like kind of in feeling down and heavy about it, said to me, let's go do something about that. However, in my life, I was already feeling tired. Like I was already feeling like this isn't the first time we've tried this, nothing's gonna happen. And then all of a sudden, something seems to happen. And then from then on, for me personally, I entered this space of like having to do something. It was never anything that I thought about like activism or using your voice to say something. However, since then, part of the heaviness and the tiredness has been from choosing to say something, because I'm a big believer in enjoying life and the opportunities in front of us, and it's sometimes so tiring when you want to enjoy your life and there's also real cultural things to deal with from our communities. So I don't know how you guys have experienced that. I'd love to start with you, actually, as the youngest in the group. How have you experienced perhaps being tired during this time?
I think for me, like being tired relates to like having to always be the best or having to always do more than everyone else. I feel like as like black people, especially black men, when you compare what we have to do in comparison to like white men, we have to do more. Like it's never enough to be enough. And having to always do like the extra step and having to always work harder than like all my other counterparts it makes me very tired, because I feel like I can never rest. Like I have to keep on going. I have to like have the drive, because especially like my parents didn't come here for me to just be lazy, not do anything. Like I have to grasp every single opportunity around me, and sometimes I just want to sleep. Like I just want to like, you know, not have to do this and not have to do that and not have to do this essay or that, whatever. Like I just want to rest sometimes, but you can't rest, because if you rest, the world, you know, it'll come to get you. So.
Would you like to pass it on to
Dr. King?
So, for me, I guess over the last year, with the way that I think about it is the murder of George Floyd, and that was really important for me in a workspace, because people were talking about him dying, and it, in a psychological way, you know, they were separating what happened to him from the injustice, that this person just died. They didn't die, he was murdered, and we watched it, you know. It was heavy stuff, man. I think the thing that really struck me about, you know, the videos of his murder were the length of time, and the people on the side pleading, and like everybody trying to get involved, and it just being really shut down. And it was just like, this is the system that we're talking about. That people can be here, they can see it, we can try and intervene, but you're still powerless to do something to actually save a person who's before you. Like, an injustice is taking place. And I just remember feeling really angry. And I was like, for me, it was, I've been at a space professionally where, like, I've crossed over there's a whole journey that you have to do with psychology and mental health to kind of get qualified. And I've crossed over into that qualified space, so I'm free, essentially. And when you get into that free place, you can think about all the stuff that you had to kind of like suppress to make it through. And that moment, seeing him in that way, being in the service that I was in, and there just being no response. Like, services can talk about being for the community. They're based in the community. Something happens in the community, or something that affects the community, and there's no response. And you're like, what you're saying you're about doesn't match up with what you're actually showing me. And there was like anger from me and my colleagues were like, you're saying you're about this stuff, but you're literally giving us nothing. And then you see all of the dynamics come out in how people take their time to try and construct something that can be said and how political it is, and you're like, at the end of it, you've said nothing, and you've said nothing several months later after the fact. So you're not even relevant anymore in saying the nothing. Did you see what I mean? Like, it was just like, this is all a show. And I was just like, boy. So I think the tiredness came from like trying to take that activist stance within mental health organizations and getting them to own the power that they do have to change the things that they're doing. Like, if you're about the community, how are we engaging with the community when the community is saying that it's hurting? Because we're all here, but all of the young people we're trying to see are out protesting, so they're not coming to the sessions. But what in the sessions are we talking about the reasons why they're protesting, how they feel about it, how that's affecting them? You know, these were questions that had to be raised, which seemed like pretty simple questions, like something is happening around you that's affecting you, but we don't talk about it here. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of questions that had to be posed and had to be answered, and that's where the tiredness is coming, because we're taught a number of skills about how to be with people and how to have conversations about difficult things, and then difficult things happen that are of a particular nature, and all of a sudden we forget the skills. And you're having to remind people, come on, you're on job, like, come on, use your skills. So that's been the tiredness, fighting with people, and you're trying to get them to acknowledge why it's so difficult to use the skills that you use every day, that you've been using for years, to talk about this thing. Yeah. I'll throw it over to Cordell.
Repeat the question for me, sir.
So, I guess the body of the question is this feeling of tiredness that we're all kind of saying that we feel, specifically in relation to yourself. What is that for you? And with regards to this conversation, really about your life as a black man, what about that feels, tiring for you?
It's tiring in the sense that, kind of what Michael was saying, that you always have to be switched on. Like, I remember this even just growing up, just wearing a hood. I can't wear a hood because I'm cold, because I'm making somebody else feel uncomfortable. But I'm cold. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't mean I'm gonna attack you, or even now it's funny. I drop my children to school. I just casually every day. I'm a crave. I don't need to wear a suit or anything like that. But I'm walking down the street with my kids, everybody smiles like, what is this? But then the second I don't have my kids, it's like an intimidation thing. But I'm like, the same guy.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to like? Do I have to now? I used to like forcefully smile walking down the street like, to make other people feel like safe. But I'm like, I don't need to do that. It's just tiring. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, why do I always have to do something extra to make somebody else feel comfortable? Like, it's just even the whole like the George Floyd thing. Like, that whole thing in itself was just like just draining to the fact that the reality of the situation is we've watched someone be murdered like, in cold blood in front of us, and I think it's fair to say majority thought that guy could have actually walked. Do you know what I mean? So imagine that feeling that just being a black man. Like, imagine if that was a child. Like, I'm an empath, so watching things like that, like, it affects me a bit, probably more than the average person. If I saw my son in that situation, what could I do? I'll probably die. I'll die next to him. I'm not gonna sit there and watch that. Like, do you know what I mean? It's just like, even as processing all of that, like, just on a day-to-day basis, like, there's so many like other examples like, that I could give you, but it's just like, but when does it end? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's the way I say I feel. I've been feeling tired. Like, just in regards to that, just like there's no stop to it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, positive vision.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, everything that you've all said, you know, it resonates with me. You know, I call myself a transformative storyteller. Be careful what you call yourself, because you will become the thing you say you are, for better or for worse. And watching these stories and empathizing, stepping out of my shoes into the other people's shoes, is tiring. You know, and I realized I hadn't worn my shoes for a long time. Maybe I'd never worn my shoes. You know, just growing up in Tottenham and just having the heaviness of the perception at 15 that when I'm getting to the bus stop and I forgot something at 15, I'm skateboarding, I'm playing rugby, I'm doing taekwondo, so I can shift. So I'm shifting back to the yard. Police are going, where are you going? I'm just a young man running. Oh, I'm black. Snap. You know, and then never actually taking that off. And only realised as a grown man driving my car at 2 in the morning as the police car pulls up next to me, I'm working out my alibi. I've done nothing wrong. I just need to communicate where I've been and where I'm going. But the policeman in the car now is probably the age of my son. I haven't changed. And there was no one to tell me that I could upgrade my psyche and actually say, I don't even care you're looking at me. I'm gonna own my own space. So that's what's been tiring, actually realizing how much I have put up with in a kind of subconscious level. And I think that goes back to George Floyd, that we are used to these deaths. It's become normalized. And the thing that struck me was that it wasn't so much how he died, it's more when he died. You know, the spiritual laws of power talk about stillness, the power of stillness. And the whole world was still. And the ripple effect of those 9 minutes across the world reached every edge. So other cultures were allies for our cause in a way that they wouldn't if they were too busy watching the favourite soap opera, watching the football game, going out, eating dinner when it happened. They wouldn't have that mass consciousness. So we're beneficiaries of that, but at what cost? When Rodney King happened, it's exactly the same dynamics. In fact, it's more extraordinary because the man had a VHS, you know, back in the day, it was a big camera, you know what I mean? And we were all secretly resigned to a degree that we might not experience justice. There will be another insurrection. So I think the heaviness is knowing the fixed narrative and knowing you can change your position in those stories. And that's where it becomes interesting for me. I love what you said, Michael, about having to be twice as good to get somewhere. And I just try and flip that and go, well, maybe I can go twice as far. Maybe that propulsion becomes me. Maybe I reach places no one could imagine because of that. Maybe that's the furnace that forged me. So as I look to what I want to achieve in my life at this stage, I don't look at my peers. I look what appears before me, what I visualize. You know, so things like that become what might have limited you, can liberate you as well if you shift your position. And also talking to people outside of our culture, if they've never seen this tragic litany of deaths of all kinds, men, women, children, dying at the hands of police and the hands of people who are racist, you know, maybe it's the first time they're experiencing our world, been able to help them navigate. It's not everybody's job, but I do feel as a journalist, as a storyteller, to invite them into our world and see whether they can play a role, but essentially not rely on anyone else because we only have ourselves. But there's a heaviness because there's a responsibility. Like when George Floyd happened, I saw a generation, Michael's generation, enter into the first stage of activism. But I didn't see a connection from previous generations of Boardwalk Farm, Handsworth, and I want to see more of these intergenerational conversations. And my position was to be on my Instagram show, telling stories, linking, having a therapy space. We even had a poet called Solomon O.B. when the Edward Colston statue came down. He stood on the plinth and he delivered a poem to the people. He said, "Be here today, great. If you're not here in 5 years' time, if you're not here in 10 years' time, it was all for nothing." So I still believe that we have an activism in art and our position as elder statespeople in the culture with younger people to work together. But there's a responsibility which is heavy.
Thank you all for sharing like that heaviness, that tiredness, of how you're feeling. That's a great way to start the conversation. Right now I'd like to actually introduce the song that inspired this conversation, which is a song titled Heavy by Vicky Passion. We have a music video snippet to sort of tease the upcoming music video release, which should be at the end of this week. So we'll be showing that video shortly. Enjoy for about a minute and we'll carry on with the conversation.
Heavy, heavy, heavy. The weight of the world so heavy. Lone wolf, how you feeling? Leaning on yourself for some rest. Time for some self-healing. Surrender to the fears in your chest. I need to do better by you, to see further for you, to grow past all of my flaws, and listen to your thoughts without shame. Listen without passing the blame. Enough, enough, I'll face what's in store. Heavy, heavy, heavy. The weight of the world so heavy. Heavy, heavy, heavy. The weight of the world so heavy.
Thank you for watching out. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. I hope you enjoyed that snippet of the Heavy music video. There'll be some more information on the Gifted by Nature socials with regards to the music and the upcoming music video, so stay tuned. As for now, we'll carry on the Heavy conversation. And I think a great place to move on to now is our first kind of topic point of education. And starting with Michael, who's the youngest in this conversation, it would be great to hear a little bit about your experience right now, you know, like going through a pandemic in education. I've never had to go through that. I don't know what that's like. Going into university, I remember when I was going to university, it was such a big thing to talk about what uni you're going to with your peers, and now being separated, learning in that way as well. What's your experience, especially as a black man? You've already alluded to feeling like you have to do double the work. What's that experience been like for you?
It's been very hard, especially when the first lockdown was announced, so March 2020. I was in year 11 at the time, so I was preparing for GCSEs, and all of a sudden I had nothing to do for 6 months, and it wasn't even like, you know, I was preparing for maybe another year of secondary school. It was like a completely new stage of education. So having to like move into that and having no bridge was very, very difficult. And then when I eventually got to that side of the bridge, it wasn't in person. It was now online for a screen, which I've never done before. And like learning for a screen it doesn't work. Like it's not the same, because it's like just watching YouTube videos. Like I need to be in front of the teacher. I need to be in the class, like conversing with my peers, and also paying attention. Like when I'm in my room, there's distractions everywhere. Like my phone is right next to me. Nobody's gonna tell me put your phone away. Nobody's gonna tell me don't get up and go to the kitchen and get food. Like when I'm in a lesson, I can't do that. Like I literally cannot like go up and get food. So not having that like restrictions on me was very, very difficult, and it made like the educational journey much harder, especially moving from like GCSE to A level. That most of you here will know, like it's a big jump. It's not like an easy transition. So having to sort of navigate A levels by myself and having to try and learn that myself was very difficult. But you know, we're going through it and I'm moving. I think I'm doing well so far. So.
I'd love to stay with you for a second, just before you pass it on, to ask about that journey of communicating as a black man across a screen. Now, for me, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but for me, one of the things I've always thought is that if you can get me into the room, I can kind of charm you. We can have we can connect over that. And then, because, you know, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but there's something about being seen as a black person, like as opposed to you're on the call and you know they can't see you, so you believe they're not judging you or anything like that. I just want to kind of touch on what that's felt like for you, having to have that conversation from a distance where you can't actually be in the room with the person you're talking to. How has that felt for you? Have you felt like you needed to play up to something, play down to something? How have you felt generally?
I don't think I've had a problem with that actually. I feel like through the screen I've been able to like express myself more because like I'm in a comfortable space. Like I'm not in an office or I'm not in a place that's like alien to me. I'm in my living room or my bedroom, so I can be who I want to be, and it's just like speaking in my room, so I feel a lot more comfortable, and I feel like I can still win people over through a screen. I don't really have a problem with that. I think I'm blessed to be quite articulate, so I can still like portray that through the screen. So for me personally, I don't think I've had an issue.
Amazing.
I'll pass on to you.
Yeah, I love your confidence. It's it's refreshing, you know, and it's, I guess as a digital native to some degree, you know what I mean, like in your own personal time, you're connecting, you know, video calls and all those kind of things as well. I mean, for me, it was interesting because my ritual of kind of getting used to being in front of a camera happened years ago. Like being an innate introvert, it was just something where I was like, whenever someone used to bring out the camera when I was young at parties, I always like move away from the camera wherever they're filming. But when you have a sense of purpose in your life, whether it's healing, whether it's filmmaking, you know, you find your passion propels you to a place where you have to stand in your truth. And I loved hip hop so much, I was prepared to go on a pirate station and play to practically nobody, and you have to talk between the songs. So you found a way of communicating to invisible people. So come a pandemic, I'm built for it. It was just crazy. I'd done so much presenting on stages. I was just acutely aware that people were isolated. And if you know how people feel, especially as a filmmaker, for instance, you know how people feel, you can move into those spaces and provide support and value. So my thing was being very empathetic with people in digital spaces. And I gave a talk about being I never really thought this way, but being the child of migrant parents to a housing organisation for Black History Month. And there were about 150, 180 people in the chat. I couldn't see any of them. And I just spoke for an hour about the journey of my parents, and what was crazy was these people said the next day, well, they said thank you, but the next day they carried on the conversation. Some people cried at certain points of the story, some people laughed, and they connected at very similar points. And I guess what excited me was this idea that humanity isn't a colour thing, it's a set of experiences that resonate with us. And this isolation is universal. And it gave me an opportunity to be more than perhaps the box people put me in, and being a connector of people. So in that sense, it's just interesting to transcend ideas of colour.
I'd love to actually ask you, with regards to, I think all of us here are individuals who've pursued their purpose in some way, and you mentioned purpose, I think you both mentioned purpose. With regards to your particular education, how have you found yourself like integrating your purpose? I think it's rare that, you know, people choose to pursue their purpose or find their purpose, especially once you find yourself in an educational system. At least that was definitely the case for me. So I'd love to know how you kind of navigated an education and your purpose, and even if you kind of created a symbiosis of both of them.
I would say it's been a round trip back to the beginning. You know, growing up, there was nobody who did the thing I loved that I could see in the world. I was an artist. At the age of 7, I was doing landscapes. That felt perfectly natural to me. But by the time I'm studying GCSEs, I'm doing my art. By the time I get to A-levels, still pursuing my art. When you go and pick your degree, and that's what you want to do. I remember walking onto the campus at Middlesex Uni, and I looked around. Apparently there was 138 people on this campus. There wasn't a single black person. And that was my environment for a whole year doing my art foundation. That's when the pressure kicks in. When you're like, this is a wrong turn. I'm in the wrong neighborhood, the wrong education neighborhood here. There's no reference points, and everything that I was foreign to them. The music I was into at that particular time, the way I dressed, everything was just like exotic, different, or strange. And I didn't come to uni for that. I came to uni to connect with people. So my alienation really began then, and it just continued. So I didn't finish my degree, ended up getting into music, DJing, just the streets, basically. By the time my dad kind of helped orientate me back into considering education, it was media. But then my media teacher looked to me and said, the one thing I know about you is you're not going to make it. And that was me asking for support. So I was like, this is the guy's going to mark my work for the next 3 years, and he's going to sit there after he's finished at uni and see my name and think, why am I marking this? You know, so that rebellious streak that I developed was very much because the system wasn't seeing me, and I was trying to give my best to it. So I left my degree, went and actually got a job as a journalist and just rubbed it in their face. I hired people that finished their degrees. By the time they finished, they came to the newspaper I was working at. So you get this sense of confidence. But I finally went back as a fully grown adult, as a teacher. What's so crazy, my dad was a teacher back in St. Vincent. That's one thing I vowed never to be. I want to do that. I'm going to do music and do my thing. So I ended up full circle, and I taught like the quietest voice needed to be heard. I wanted to create an inclusive space, and I always did affirmations in the morning, and I made sure we had breakfast. I was like a Black Panther man. I was like, breakfast program, affirmations, and then we're going to do the study. So for me, it just became so important to be that change, to offer the education that I didn't get access to. And you know, that's kind of been the journey. But it's always been a feeling very much that education wasn't accepting me, to be honest. Yeah. I'm gonna go to Cordell.
Education. Do you want the education part, or do you want the whole social side, about being online?
I'd love to hear about like your experience of education and your purpose as an artist as well.
I think my experience in education wasn't necessarily a good one, because I felt like there's a particular way I like to learn. But none of the education systems I was in until I got to college catered for that. So there was just like a straight way, this is how you do things, left, right, up, down. But like, I'm a diagonal type of person actually. I'm so unorthodox in like everything I do, but there was nobody to like nurture that side or even show me that, okay, you think this way because you're this type of person. So like, a lot of the time, I used to just be that child, you know, in the school report, well, your son's smart, but he just talks a lot in class and all that type of stuff. Not particularly because I wasn't interested in the subject, but it was more like I wasn't being taught the way I needed to be taught, which is kind of funny that now I'm in the position I am. I try and teach from what I do and help other people understand, okay, cool, you think like this because you're that type of person or you're creative. Or I literally did like a project the other day with Marvel and Prince's Trust, and one of the young girls was like, I'm an awkward person and I think this way, nobody thinks like this, and like I'm always in my head and I have anxiety and all of these things, and I'm like, okay, you're creative. And she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, yeah, I go through that every single day, I've been through that, but there was nobody there to actually show me, whether they've been through that or not, okay, these particular type of people tend to be this way. So I was quite disconnected until it came to the subjects that I liked. So anything like drama, art, media, I'm lucky I was like the generation that kind of came up when they integrated media into schools. So I was kind of like in that generation. So when it came to those subjects, like I passed like flying colours. But like generally, I didn't really like education just because of that factor. And like, I wouldn't say it affected me. It kind of like pushed me, I think, closer to where I should have been. But I just didn't have anybody to help me navigate and understand. This is what you need to do, and this is how you need to do it, and this is why you need to do that. Do you know what I mean? So like, it was like a chalk and cheese thing for me. Some days I like to go to school and sit down in certain classes, and other days I didn't. And what I really, over time, realised that I never saw myself in school. Teaching me about history and all of that type of stuff. Any type of history that ever related to me was always slavery. So we didn't do anything else. Do you know what I mean? So we wasn't kings and queens. Like it wasn't. There isn't a picture of the queen like bowing down to one of our queens in Africa. There wasn't like why am I always being shown that like I'm a minimal person? Like, you know, and that I've always had a like bitter taste in my mouth about stuff like that. And I'm one of the first people, my children in the house, like they know that they're black. Like from early, I don't play any of that type of games. Like, you know, especially my daughter. Like, you're black and you're a black woman. Like, well, you're going to be a black woman, so it's going to be twice as hard for me. Like, do you know what I mean? So I feel like I have to implement that into my children from as early as possible. But I don't show it to them in a way where they think, okay, we don't care about anybody else. But it's like you have to be aware of that, because I've had this conversation with my mum that there's certain things that she's gone through that she didn't teach me. I had to kind of go out there and learn that for myself. But had she taught me, not to say like nothing ever would have went wrong, but I would have been more prepared for that. Right? Do you know what I mean? So when I'm going into schools and that, and I'm not seeing this like myself and all these other things, it's not going to affect me as much because I've got somebody that's already showed me the ropes. Like, do you know what I mean? Right, that's my education in a nutshell. Yeah.
Alright, so when I think of education, it's an interesting one for me because I always go back to my secondary school. And I've done like too many different layers of education. Secondary, college, undergrad, postgrad, doctorate, but I always go back to secondary. And the reason why I go back there is I was very fortunate because I went to a predominantly black secondary school in the middle of Tottenham. And by predominantly black, I mean like there was maybe one or two people who weren't black in the school as students, and almost all those teachers were black. And my mum fought for me to get into that school because the other local school, you'll know it was White Hart Lane. And mum was like, you are not going there. Under no circumstances are you going there. And I think that was the first time I realized like the heaviness of being a black boy. Because the reason she didn't want me to go there was because she's like, they're not going to see you. They're just going to see your color, and they're not going to push you for what I know is in you. And I was like, oh. I had no concept of it. I was like, oh, okay, cool, this is a thing. They're just going to, okay. And I never felt that at secondary school. And it was one of those things that completely changed my life. If I hadn't had those teachers, I had that experience of being seen and seeing, I could have been in a very different place. Yeah, education's a very powerful thing. I can relate to what Cordell was saying about not seeing myself in the subjects. But again, I was very fortunate because like my mom and my aunts were like, you will see yourself. You will put posters, books, everything. So it was like all this stuff going on outside of school that I never really appreciated as a child. We just like, oh, they're just being extra. That's just how they are. And it wasn't until I got older I was like, oh, no, this stuff made a difference. This stuff showed me something about myself that I didn't even take in the time to let me know that I can do things. I can be someone. But yeah, education. So many barriers of education as well. Because I guess, like what that I didn't find out about myself in education until much later was I have dyslexia. So I went through all the way up until like my postgraduate was where I got diagnosed. So you think like that's like infants, secondary, college, uni, like the fifth layer, like that most people on average don't go to, was where they were like, oh, you have dyslexia. You're like, I lived my whole life in my mind believing that I was an average student struggling to just be average. To realize then, oh, no, actually with a little bit of support, you know, you can do a lot better. And you're like, this is mad. Education, man. Such a powerful thing and so underrated. And there's so much stuff that doesn't get taught. Like you were saying, Cordell, like there was a lot of stuff I've learned later, like emotional management stuff and emotional literacy stuff that never really understood at school. Nobody ever spoke about it. It wasn't on any curriculum anywhere. It wasn't part of any kind of after-school program. And you're like, how the hell did I get through without learning this stuff? Because of how integral it is to like just being in a healthy way. Sorry, I feel like I'm gone off.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for sharing your experiences of education. It's so funny. I'm literally picking from something all of you said. I'll start with you, Cordell. I think we all relate to that thing about if it wasn't the thing for you, then you weren't really that interested in it. So then it was kind of seen like you weren't a good student, but you weren't particularly interested in that thing. I relate to that as well in my experience of education. Just to throw to you, Dr. Kumar, you mentioned how you went to predominantly black school. Same, I went to school in Africa. So it's like my teachers, my co-students, there was no other race in my year, my class, in my school. And that experience is so different from coming here. I remember when I first came here and I experienced exactly what you were saying when you were the only black person in your year or in the school. I remember walking in and just being very shocked by that. Like there was no one that I could, because when you're coming from a whole different continent, a whole different world really, you're hoping that when you arrive, you'll be able to connect with someone.
Yeah.
And then to be the only one that you like, just something as simple as music. You're just like, all right, I'm sure at the very least when I walk in, I can talk to someone about Jay-Z. I can just, someone who, and then there's no one there, and then you just feel kind of isolated. And then back to what you were saying, it's so funny. I was one of those students as well. It was like, if I wasn't interested in it, I couldn't pass it. There was nothing you could do I'm not interested in it. And there was one, it's only later on, like even you were saying, like, when I was like in school, and one of my favorite subjects was literature. I love writing, and I never liked writing with reference. It was always like what I was feeling. I just wanted to get that out, and I wanted to write it. And my teachers would always come to me and go, "Where's the reference for this thought that you have?" And I'd go, "No, I just thought about it, and then I wrote that is my reference." And then you'd get a fail or a C because there's no reference. Then cut to later on in my life, I've grown, I've read more books, so now I can actually reference, not a 13 or 15-year-old. So you've read more, and then now you're like reading your original thoughts in someone else because you never read them before, but you've had that thought. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, I've thought about this, and then you open it, how is this guy saying exactly what I thought? And then back to what you were saying about no one there to guide you, to tell you like, oh, actually what you are is this, because if you have an original thought, you're this, and then kind of guide you down that path so that, like you were saying, it came full circle. I literally felt like, for me, education was great because I think education is important. That said, I don't believe I ever found myself in a space of confidence within my educational process. I think I was really trying to get through it. I was trying to finish. Let me just get to the end of this. So I think for this as well, if you have any teachers that were helpful to you at any point, I think this is a nice kind of time to kind of mention them and just give them a shout out. And I personally, and I'd love for us to go around, I'd like to shout out Mr. Bobby Oduali from Port Harcourt, Nigeria, who was the only teacher, I would say, but at least one of the only teachers who just stood by me, just always like whispered in my ear that no, you're good enough. Like I just want to shout him out. And I don't know if you guys have any teachers you'd like to shout out. I'd like to start with.
Yeah, Miss Demetri, she's an art teacher. Yeah, sixth form. And the art block was away from the school, so it was just a whole different vibe. You just felt like you weren't in school anymore. You were in a craft space.
Mm.
Yeah, and she was a total rebel. So you just felt, this is a place you could do your thing. Yeah.
How about you, Dr.
I have so many teachers I can thank. Some of them, sadly, are no longer here with us anymore. Mr. Henry, my English teacher. Yeah, I hated English, and that man made me love English, in love reading in a way that I had disconnected with throughout my teens. Mr. James, my science teacher, I loved science. That was one of my favorite subjects. But I don't know, it was just something about the way in which he structured things, which I feel like it just got some of the best out of me in that subject. Mr. Gordon, maths teacher, Miss Sampson, she was our home ec teacher. Like she was just a very genuine person. And it was weird, like seeing a teacher be that genuine with you as a student at the time, and just feeling like, no, she's actually here to try and help me. Like genuinely, this is not just a job for her. Yeah, had some amazing teachers, man.
Amazing, thank you. How about you, Michael?
I have a couple as well. Probably the first one I'll say is Miss Matheson. She wasn't like a teacher, she was more like when you would get referred, she would be the person you would go to. And like early years of secondary, I was a questionable student. And like she was the one that made me like realize the value of my intelligence, because she said the reason you haven't been excluded is because you're smart. So it was a thing where like, because I was intelligent, because they knew, like my secondary school knew I was going to be one of those kids that would get the grade 9, they didn't want to get rid of me, because if you get rid of me, you've got rid of one of your grade 9s. So it made me like realize the power I have in my intelligence. Also, my old maths teacher, Mr. Fremicom, he was like an example of black excellence. Like he had many degrees and he was just so good at maths. Like, just amazing, and having that as a teacher every single day and seeing somebody love what they do and be so good at what they do, I think it was very, and the fact that he was black as well, it was very like nice to see. Also Miss Oladane, she's one of my history teachers now. She just like, she inspires me because she loves being black, and she's a black historian, so seeing a black historian in the flesh that loves to do what they do and loves to tell the stories of not just old white people but black people as well, and convey those stories to me who like early in my education I never got to hear those stories, but being fortunate enough to hear them now, and she and her being the person that's conveying them, I think is really like, I'm very fortunate and I'm very like grateful to have that, because you know there are people that didn't, so those are just to name a few.
I'd probably say Mr. Hussein, like he was strict. He threatened everybody every day. I'm gonna phone your mum, I'm gonna get early study leave. But do you know what? Like, anytime I stayed after school to kind of work on like, what's it, home? What do you put it? DMT? When you make like CD racks and all that type of stuff. Like he just used to just be real with me. Like, do you know, like you're an arse. Like he would tell me straight. You're an arse. Like you're really smart, but like you just fool around in class all the time. But like when you're here with me, I can see your potential. Like you're switched on. You know how to scale things down, like with technical drawings and all this type of stuff. But he would tell me that if you concentrate on that part of yourself, then you will go far. But if you keep fooling around like with the other idiots in the class, then you're gonna end up in the same place. But anytime he spoke, for some reason, I just listened without being ignorant. Like thinking, oh, what is this guy doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like when you're in school, you're kind of reluctant to listen. You kind of think you know everything, and you're around your friends and all of that stuff, class clown and all of that. But like, anytime he spoke, I actually just listened. And like, a few times he made me realize, okay, I need to humble myself, like, and then just sit in the class and just do what I'm supposed to do. I actually got 8, so. Would you have like 9s or something? I think that's an equivalent to, I don't know, what's it, that 8? Oh, sorry, 8.
Alright, well, I think this is a great moment to say thank you to all those teachers out there who inspire us, and don't just do it because it's a job, but do it because they genuinely love to inspire their students. So we just want to use this opportunity as black men to say thank you to those teachers. Thank you very much. And I think now nice to move into the last topics of this conversation, starting with our experience of mental health as black men. And I have a feeling Dr. Kumar will have some great insight for us in this particular topic. I would like to get it running again and kind of talk a little bit about my experience of my mental health journey, which is so interesting because you don't know you have them, at least. I didn't know I had a mental health journey until you start looking back at the things that have affected you. And for me, the biggest thing has been my awareness that I grew up without my father in my life. When I was growing up, I was definitely a kid who was, well, if you wanted to find me, you could find me, so I don't need you. And that was just my perspective on it. I was with my mum alone, so my perspective on it was I had to look after my mum and forget everything else. And there's some very key moments in my life that I remember just having a flash of thinking, man, it'd be nice if a dad was here right about now. One of those things is like being raised in a single parent household and your friends have two parents and two cars and you're like, man, if there was one more parent in here, you have no idea because we're keeping up with you on one parent type of thing. Or learning to shave, I'll never forget that. I started growing my facial hair really early in my life, maybe 13, and I had a full-on like mustache at 13, and I started looking very different from all my classmates. And I remember thinking I didn't like it, I wanted to shave and I didn't know how. And I bought some clippers and I just took it to my face and just shaved the whole thing off. It was a very strange feeling. I think I cried in the process because it was just this, I wish there was someone here to teach me this, or knotting my tie. My mum used to knot my tie for me, and then one day I remember she wasn't around, and I had to figure it out. I remember just being in the mirror, just so sad that there wasn't anyone there to help me with this. And then cut to 10 years later, I really start to think about my traumas in life and what not growing up with a father figure would do to a young man, and how I always describe it as like, you're the biggest lion in the house at 8 years old, and that's not a good thing to have for a cub. You shouldn't be the lion of the house, if that makes sense. So for me, that's where my mental health journey has begun, and I'd love to hear from all of you, and I'd love to start with you, Dr. Kumar, about talking a little bit about mental health with regards to black people and people of colour, and yourself also, your mental health journey.
Alright, I'll start with my mental health journey. So, similar to yourself, I grew up without my dad after my parents separated and got divorced when I was like 12. And that left me very angry. I carried that anger with me every day for several years, and it came out, I was getting in fights at school, like just dumb stuff. I was getting in arguments with my mum all the time. And like you said about being the big lion in the house now, like my mum couldn't really check me. She tried to check me and we'd just end up in arguments and I wouldn't back down, and it would get physical and I'd be like out of the house here, or something would happen, and it was just like, I knew that if my dad was present, I wouldn't necessarily be responding in this kind of way. There was just something about his presence that my psyche just fell in differently with. So that was kind of the first thing that happened. I was trying to like work out, understand where this anger was coming from, and just eating me alive. Like I was just not doing well because all this anger that I was carrying. And then we were kind of reconnected later on in life, me and my dad. By that point, unfortunately, he was very ill, and I lost him very shortly after that to cancer. And that was like so weird, because in a way, I went through this whole process of like mourning the loss of him the first time round. And I could relate to what you were saying, Kio, about like different areas of life where you're like, I wish there was an older man here to like guide me through this, to help me understand like how to regulate this stuff. And it was mostly me and my guys trying to figure it out together. So yeah, I'd like, in my mind, he existed, but it was almost, he might as well have been dead. So to come back and then to reconnect and then to lose him again, was just so painful. And I remember like just kind of pressing on with work. And then there was a point, because after when you're seeing people, generally you have to write a report or a summary of like the work that you've done or something. And I finished a piece of work or something, and I tried to sit down to write the report, and it was like my brain just couldn't get into gear. And I sat there for ages, like trying to like think about all the stuff that had happened and like put it together in the way that I've been able to make sense of it with the person in the room. And I just couldn't do it. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. I took it to my supervisor, and then they started like thinking with me about all the stuff that was going on. And I just realized like I was still grieving the loss of him. And I had several other family members that had passed away within a space of like 18 months. Like my aunt that I was very close to, and like other cousins, and you're like, so I couldn't do the thing that I loved doing, the thing that I was working so hard to become. I was like, oh no, I need help. So I went and got some like bereavement counseling and like talked out with some people and tried to make sense of the stuff, which was really hard in itself because nobody else I knew had ever done any of that stuff. And obviously you work in mental health, but you're never like, oh, it's me, it's my turn to kind of step up and share something. You're like, oh, it's not that deep, it's not that important. But yeah, there was a definite release in kind of having to have that space and be on the other side of the couch and like share the things with people. But yeah, then there's been loads of just stuff that happens, you know, life that happens, and you're like, it just chips away at you. It wears you down in certain ways, and you find yourself responding. I always notice when I'm stressed because of how I respond to others. Like, if I'm responding to my wife, or I'm responding to my mom, or like someone close to me in a very short way, I know it's because like there's something going on. And I remember looking back on a period of my life where it was like, that was just how I was. I was just always responding in this negative, like, burnt out way. But at the time, not necessarily realizing it was because I wasn't taking enough care of my own mental health. And when I think about like the mental health of others now, going back to your other part of the question, there's so much that we're not taught, kind of connecting what we were saying earlier, about like what you're taught as a young person. We don't really teach young people emotional literacy. So when they have to meet someone like me now, and they're like 12, 13, they can't really express how they feel, because they're thinking about it, they're thinking about the question in a very linear fashion. You ask someone how they're feeling, and they're feeling like loads of things. So to say I'm feeling X doesn't really make sense. And then you're like, I'm not sure if it's X or if it's Y. And then when you name the people that actually you could be experiencing multiple things at any one time, you see the look of like relief, like, oh, okay, so I'm not just going crazy because I'm happy, but I'm also sad and frustrated, but I'm also really excited about different things that are happening in my life. And it's like, it takes real work for people to learn how to communicate how they feel and the value of that. There's so many guys that I meet, that I work with as clients, who struggle to see the value in anything that's not logic-based. Like, logic is it, emotions, trash. Don't talk about emotions, what are those for? Trash. Suppress them, keep it moving, logic, bro. And you're like, no. Like, there's actual like wealth and greatness in your feelings. And you have to learn to own them, because they're having an impact on how you think and how you feel and how you move, that you're not accounting for because you're dismissing them. You're thinking it's all just because I'm moving in this very logical way. But even in that, it's normally based in emotion. That people find safety and security in their logic. And actually it's the desire to stay safe, because the emotions are so wild and uncontained that you don't want to venture into having to deal with it. That normally keeps men in this place, but then they don't see the effect that it has on the rest of your life. Like, your relationships continue to crumble because you can't articulate the stuff that's happening in your inside world. You can't set appropriate boundaries with people because you don't know where the boundary is. You're not allowing yourself to test out what feels okay. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's so much that comes from being able to connect with your emotional world. And I think in our context, it's almost a double difficulty, because it's not something that's taught generally. but then it's also something that you get like conflicting information about as a male. Like there's so many messages about how you should be as a male and how you should display your emotions that don't actually allow you to open them up and share them with people in a particular way. And it's trying to like deconstruct that a lot of people find themselves doing later in life, but a lot of the pain and damage has already been done.
Love that. Thank you for sharing with that. Like, actually, what you mentioned about emotional literacy, if you don't mind, I'd love to actually pass it to Fusion, because we recently had a conversation a few days back, and you mentioned how in your life you felt blessed enough that at a young age you found emotional literacy. I was saying how I only learned it yesterday, and you were like, "Oh, I you know, since growing up or something." I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Firstly, thank you for sharing. I mean, this is such a powerful circle because, like, everybody's story just lights up as you listen to the story, and it kind of helps us all kind of open up and share more. I think for me, the whole idea of emotional literacy, it wasn't something which was a choice. It was more a survival technique, because I mentioned earlier that I was painting and drawing at the age of 7, like doing landscapes and stuff. That same day I'm doing this beautiful landscape, my mum is leaving us in the house to go and visit my dad, who's in a psychiatric ward, a place called Claybury, which was just a name. I had no idea where that was in the world. My mum said, I'm leaving you and your sister, and don't answer the door, and don't answer the phone. If I call you, I will ring once, and then I will hang up. Then I will ring again. That is the signal for you to pick up the phone. And I can invert that story now and realize how terrified my mum must have been to leave her only 2 children to go and see her husband, who is not how he was before. And what made it more epic for us was the fact that he had gone to the Caribbean, as a lot of us, like our parents, had done, to go and build a home, you know, create that thing that, you know, his mother wanted, reluctantly leaving behind his children, who were like 5 and 6 or thereabouts. And the fact that he comes back, a whole different person. Whatever had happened there had triggered his bipolar, which was, we experienced this for the first time, a whole different person. So I had a dad, but he wasn't who he used to be. And there was no one outside of those 4 walls who could explain anything to us. You know, so I realized I'd gone inside myself. These paintings and these things I was painting, drawing, was me just making sense of a world inside my own head. And those formative years between like 1 and 7, where you're downloading the outside world. I was downloading my dad's, what was called manic depression at the time, and that was my norm. That was what I was processing and dealing with. And what I realized as I was getting older was that this wasn't normal to everybody else. There was a real taboo in the black community. You don't tell anyone outside of those 4 walls what's going on. The mental illness is like the juju or some kind of voodoo or something like that. That's it. You can't put that back once you put that outside of those 4 walls. So it was only in my 30s I actually whispered these stories to people, and I still feel a tremendous amount of shame because it feels like I'm letting him down. But I've carried those stories for so many years, and I still feel a sense of shame because he was a great man. And that was the most difficult thing for me to reconcile with. This is a man whose command of the English language was exemplary. This is a man who had incredible dreams in St. Vincent, but those dreams are cancelled as soon as his mum took him to the UK. That heaviness of being black and othered. As you were saying, coming from Africa or from the Caribbean, you are everything that's there. You can excel, but nobody saw who he was. And I think that pressure really made him at odds with the whole world. And being his son, any dream I had, he'd always check it. Be careful. Don't dream too big. Don't think you can overcome these things. I've tried. Couldn't do it, and I'm great. I'm like, you are great. But what am I supposed to do as a teenager thinking I can't challenge police brutality because you got mashed up by the police and you were traumatized by that? That you got sacked for mental illness when really you should have support. And that was my nemesis. I had a dad in the house, but my dad G-checked everything. Anything I wanted to be, I had to somehow defeat his idea of it in order to validate myself. And I remember, you know, he would go in and out of the mental institutions over years, and the tablets he was on was, the most tragic thing for me was that these early tablets had lithium in them. And what it would do with manic depression is you either get super high and you get the dopest ideas and you want to go and change the world, and then they drug you up so you go super low and you don't even want to live. And this tablet put him in this perfect limbo, conscious with no motivation. And he lived his whole life like that. And I was a witness to that. And it terrified me, because I was like, I've got your DNA and your dreams. And if I try and chase those dreams, am I going to snap? So I was always like, what did he do that I could avoid doing? And he had isolated himself. Being the smartest guy in the family, in his family tree, a lot of people leaned on him and were kind of like trying to take money, take everything they could. So he had isolated himself. And I realized having friends, having people to talk to, talking, saying to your peers, your friends, this is how I'm feeling right now. Having, you know, women in your circle, like that feminine energy, where it isn't necessarily sexual, but just the ability just to say, this is how I'm feeling, a woman to be there as a listener. And I became very good at that, so my emotional vocabulary was like pretty dope. But then you try and turn to some of your boys, and they can't reciprocate. Like, they can hear you be blown away by the fact that you're sharing all this stuff, but as far as them sharing something, they're like, they would tell you their problems, and you might be able to help facilitate that. So I almost became like that guy you could talk to about stuff you couldn't talk to about. But where I had an opportunity to kind of share like that burden of my dad's mental health, which I would never bring up, and the dreams I had, which I didn't have any space for any validation. I just remember just touching like my mid-20s, and I just really believed in everything I could be. And I remember screaming at him in the doorway in his bedroom. It was just like, how much do I have to earn your respect? I'm doing all the things I want to do, and you keep telling me it's not possible. Like 30K, 35K, 40K, and it became my engine. It was driving me to defeat him. I got to 45K by 25, running a website, MTV. I was living this dream, but I wasn't sleeping. I was going beyond twice as hard. I was going 3 times as hard. And it's only when the whole thing crashed that I realized this wasn't necessarily how I was supposed to be living my life. I was trying to defeat people and prove things, and afraid of becoming ill and all of these things. And it's only when he passed cancer as well, like, that he reconciled that maybe, just maybe, what I was doing was kind of cool. Last 2 weeks, I had that validation. And all it meant was I could begin my life. That was the craziest thing. When he passed, I'm like, I haven't got anyone to tell me I can't be who I want to be. Who do I want to be? I didn't know. That beginning of just saying, right, let me sift through all these experiences, these traumas, these hopes, these dreams, these ideas, and build something that looks familiar to me. And that's when I started to just stop looking at job titles and definitions of what work and what play is, and just say, just what feels good, what feels empowering, what would make me want to stay up, and what would drive me, and how does it feed me, you know? And I think the biggest mental health barrier is, like, as I'm thinking about who I've become, is I have a real passion and ability to curate spaces that feel safe, but don't have many safe spaces for me. And it's this idea of constantly servicing, providing that service, and getting this kind of sense of joy that I can see people healing. But then when I want that space for myself, I haven't learned how to create that. And that's like a really sad realization, to be honest. And that's where the kind of the work is beginning. Kind of let go of the curator, safe space creator role, and just say, actually, no, sometimes I'm not okay. Sometimes I do just want to be on my own, and sometimes I don't, but I don't know where to go. And it's all part of the journey.
Kio, just to say,
Yes, sir.
what Fusion was talking about is what we would call intergenerational trauma. That his dad went through something, horrible something, and saw his child and was like, I don't want this for you. I want you to stay safe. And from that place of wanting his safety, ended up curtailing his dreams. Ended up loading him with things that became baggage that stopped him from fulfilling all that was in him to do. That's intergenerational trauma. You know, these ideas about who we are and who we can be that have been created for us from someone else's experience. But it's great to hear that for you, Fusion, you found a way to overcome some of that and get free of some of that.
Even just creating Fusion, just as a concept, being the youngest in the house, about being, you know, the cub, like, you know, that was just like, how can I pour into an identity? Like, you know, a lot of us go into creative industries, we kind of like reimagine ourselves, and just being able to come up with that character was just something which enabled me to look at big things and see myself. But returning back to Alain, it's like he was neglected. You know, that's the scariest thing, to look at the other side of myself and know there's people know me for 10, 15 years, would never know my birthday. You know, so it's like you said, the trauma and trying to go back and rediscover yourself.
Thank you both. Thank you so much for that. Staying like aware of time as well, I'd love to pass it on to Cordell and Michael to kind of wrap up your experiences of mental health before we move on to the last part. Thanks.
My mental health has just been a roller coaster. I feel like, if I be honest, it's like the beginning of like just acknowledging certain things from my past. Like, to be honest, like that whole thing. I don't know. I saw a post on Instagram the other day, and it kind of like opened. I can't even remember what it said, to be fair, but it kind of opened my perspective on like just how I like process things. Like, do you know what I mean? Like not having a dad in the house and then having my mum trying to initially like essentially father me. She can't teach me how to do that. So certain things I was going through outside, I can't tell my mum that. She's just going to go into like worry me, like, oh my God, don't do this, don't do that. So then that kind of affected my relationship with my mum. But then even off the back of that now, trying to learn to be a man outside. Like, I'm not learning that from the right places. Like, do you know what I mean? And then like, I'm coming home with things I've learned from the roads that my mum's never taught me. Like, do you get? And she's confused because she doesn't understand where that's coming from. And then I'm confused because I don't really know my dad. So I feel like a part of me is kind of missing, because that, like, sometimes I'll have a conversation with my dad and we say things, I'm like, oh, we kind of think the same, like, do you know what I mean? But like, when you're young, I don't have a person to kind of learn that from. Okay, cool, I'm kind of like you in that sense, or you should handle things this way as a man. Like, my mum's not gonna, even if my mum could teach me that, I'm naturally not going to listen to my mum because she's a woman. Like, do you get what I'm saying? And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there looking at her like, what do you know about being a man, kind of thing. So I feel like that kind of made me, even that just boil things up, and that, like you both saying, that just I rationalized a lot of things and just made everything logic. So then the emotional part of everything just got dismissed. I don't need it. This don't make sense to be that. I don't need it. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's only, I feel like only now I'm starting to learn that, okay, cool, that's not how you handle things. Like, there's things I've done in the past I'm like, you shouldn't have done it, but there was no one to show me or teach me that. Do you know what I mean? I'm having to just learn that for myself. So it was always like a mad battle. Like, again, going back to like the educational side of things as well, it's like I think a certain way, but again, there's nobody there to tell me that, okay, cool, like you process things this way, but okay, cool, you're on the left side of the field, here's what to consider on the right side of the field. Like, so I get like a balanced perspective. So like, I don't know, it's been like a mad battle all times. Like, it's always just been in my head, like, okay, why am I the different person? Why does this not make sense to me? And even again, like seeing people with like two parents in the home, I never had that. So it's like certain conversations they're having, I can't have with them. I'm just like, I'm quiet around the room. Do you get what I mean? And I'm in my head like, oh, I've never experienced that. Like, it's mad. Every time I see one of my friends or like my cousin's dad pass, it's weird because like I see them mourning. I don't know if I'll do that. Because as much as he's here, I don't have a relationship with my dad. So it's like it's crazy to think. I'm in a way, even though like they passed in the morning, I'm jealous. Like, it's like, right, I didn't feel like, unless I could patch it up, I still got time, good willing, but it's like, I'll never know, right now, I'll never know what that feels like. Do you know what I mean? Like, even like, just the anger I built up on me inside of the years, I didn't even realise that's what was happening. Like, do you know, like, so I don't know, my mental health it's been like a roller coaster throughout my whole life, but I'm only now just beginning to like process it and understand that, okay, cool, like, you have to deal with things in a particular way. And it's weird because I'm at the stage here where I'm having to like kill a part of myself, because back then, that kind of allowed me to survive. I no longer need that person. So it's like, I'm getting emotional. Just I was saying to you earlier, about like, just therapy.
Yeah.
Give me a second. Yeah, I don't talk to people about stuff like this. So like, it just gets brought up. And at times, it can come out mad, rage and fire. Don't stand in front of me, because anyone will get it. But like, it's only now I'm learning that, like, cool, you need to take care of it. I literally had a conversation with my cousin this morning, like, and he was talking about just leveling up in life. Like, my career is going well. Like, I'm buying equipment, I'm getting my new car on Friday, all of this stuff. And I literally said to him today, do you know what I realized? Like, man, all the credit is
Take your time, bro.
I'm comfortable, but it's just, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, Rod, you know what, yeah? I spent all this money on upgrading all of this stuff. I'm not taking care of my health, like my mental health, right? Do you get what I'm saying? So like, now I'm trying to learn, like, okay, cool. This is the way you handle it, do you understand? Yeah, but that's my thing.
Respect.
No.
For me, I think growing up, I've always like had a space to talk, and like I've always had a very like close relationship with my mom. But like boys, like I can tell my mom anything, and I think I'm very fortunate to have that, because it means that I've always I've grown up with emotional intelligence. Like I know how to handle myself. Like I don't think I've ever gotten to that stage where like my emotions are so bottled up that I let it out of reach, because my mom always made sure that there was somewhere like I could come to speak. But I think like growing up, one thing my mom kind of neglected was like my wokeness, I would say. Like as much as I would say I was like mentally stable, I wasn't mentally stable in regards to the color of my skin and what it actually means to be black, because like I would say I was like psychologically asleep to like racism in this country, especially because when you hear about racism, it's always in America. Like when you learn about it, it's always in America. You don't really hear about it in the UK. And the one example of like where it leads to insurrection or unrest would be 2011 riots. But I was 7 years old. Like I don't remember that. Like I don't even remember any videos. You already know I was not rioting. Like I don't remember all of that. So that one example that most people in the room can point to and say, oh, this is a point where racism boiled over, I can't remember it. So having the 2020 protests and being able to like actively go and protest and just being there and being able to like look around and say like, wow, like this country is racist. Like this, like being black is really powerful. And at that moment, like standing there in front of Parliament and the protest, just, it woke me up. Like my mind just went, like there was like a click, like a light bulb moment. And I was really like, wow, like the color of my skin is so powerful, and it's something that I really do need to explore. And I think having that, it like allowed my mental health to strengthen, because when I looked at the world, I now not only looked at the world as a man, but I looked at the world as a black man. And it changed the way I looked at things and how things like appeared to me. And it meant that I was a lot more careful navigating the world, and it's made life easier, I would say, because I'm more aware and I'm more alert of everything around me, and it's growing mentally, growing educationally.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing, for facilitating the space for all of us to feel safe enough to share. It's been fantastic speaking to all of you, honestly. And I believe now we've got some questions from the audience, which I'd love to share with you guys, and have some quick answers, being aware of time. There's a question here from Isaac, which I really love, and I'd actually love to pass this to you, Fusion, for Sorry, Cordell, for a quick answer. The question is, any thoughts on how some black men limit their identities, act too gangster or tough, etc.? I often get viewed as odd by some fellow black men because I'm vegetarian, I meditate, I dance, and I love to do yoga. So do you have any thoughts on how some black men might limit their identities because they act too gangster or something like that?
I think it's they limit it because they're scared of the vulnerability that it looks like from the outside. Like, if I'm not seen to be this tough, this idea of what it is to just be a man in general, let alone a black man, like, we don't cry, we don't do this, we don't do yoga, we don't look after mental health, we don't, everything's manly, be strength. Like, it's kind of like people limit themselves because of what they fear the outside world is going to think of them. When in actual fact, when you do what makes you feel comfortable, they might reject it at first, but I see a strength. And I feel like that's the bottom line of it. They're scared of the vulnerability. So you kind of just have to just put that to the side and just do what you need to do. Because at the end of the day, if you live for other people, it's only ever going to affect you.
Thank you. Dr. Kumar, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I say we're social beings. So like, I think everyone's trying to find where they fit in. They're trying to look and see something that they can connect with. And in different social spaces, there are different things that are considered to be the norm. So like if you're in a middle class or upper class space, they're moving differently. So the idea of what it means to be black in that space looks very different. Like, people forget, because we think here in the UK, you hear a lot of firsts for black people. But like where I'm from in Jamaica, like, they've been doing stuff for a long time. Like, this stuff that we're celebrating as first isn't first over there. It's not even like hundredths over there. There are people, there are upper class black people who would look at you and treat you in the same way that an upper class white person here in the UK would. They'd be like, what you're doing, I'm not for it. We don't move that way. So there are like different layers to it, where I think people, maybe from a working class space, view themselves a particular way and then constrain themselves to fit that mold, because that's what is seen as like, this is what it means to be a man in this space. Do you see what I mean? But like in other spaces, if you're exposed to it, you realize, oh no, this isn't the only way to be a man. This isn't the only way I can respond to a particular situation. And then you're presented with a choice. Like, am I going to continue trying to be this guy, or am I going to try and do something like this, or try something else? I think people it's unfortunate that we don't often get the experiences to live outside of our zones, if that makes sense, and see that there are other ways of being. But predominantly, as Cordell said, it comes back to, again, feeling scared. If you're the only one who moves in a particular way in a space where it's pejoratively this way, then you're vulnerable. You can be targeted. That's the reality. Whether it's physical, mental, or anything else, you can be vulnerable.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Could go about 3 minutes. So first, I'd like to say that we'd like to thank Blackout UK for bringing the topic of gender and sexuality into the conversation. It's not something that we've addressed or held space for in this conversation, as we didn't assume the speaker's sexuality, but it's an important part of this conversation. So the one question I'll touch on here is from Peter, who says, how can this kind of circle and space benefit from a queer perspective? Is it nice at being sidelined, and why? I would like to touch on this and say that this kind of space really is a space of being open, regardless of you. As we've mentioned, we don't actually know what each other's sexualities are, but every individual has a unique perspective. Even in this setting of black individuals, each of us have a very unique perspective to offer and to learn from each other. So that's how I would say that a queer perspective would help this sort of space. And it's not that we are isolating that, but rather that it's not particularly about that. That's what I would say. I'd love to quickly kind of pass it to Fusion if you have any thoughts on this yourself. Maybe about 2 minutes.
Sure. I mean, I think just simply, we live in a world of so much external judgment. You know, some people never get to live their authentic lives outside of their four walls. So having these conversations where we can talk about mental health or sexuality or bullying or, you know, not having, you know, certain things that we would feel we need in our lives is the first step. You know, and I just feel the more people can live authentic lives where they can articulate who they are and feel heard. I think we underestimate the value of feeling heard, being listened to. You know, one of the key things that you said, Kio, that was powerful was not seeking validation in these exchanges. We don't need someone to say, I agree with you, it's I appreciate you sharing. And as a first step, we could move more towards having spaces where people can just articulate their truths. And I, for one, you know, just believe that authenticity is, you know, whoever's in that room, speak your truth. I don't per se feel that there should be, I think there can be safe spaces for each of these dialogues, but one of my things is intergenerational conversations are powerful, and I think cross-gender conversations and all these dynamics, I think, bring more oxygen to conversations. Because I think quite often, you know, if you have very specific black men sitting together speaking about black stuff with black people listening, it's like we kind of broadly agree that racism's pretty crap. You know what I mean? But you want to hear other people's ideas and other ears listening. So, I mean, me personally, I just think it's just about having authentic spaces with the shit.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's now 8 o'clock, so we've come to the end of our time. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'd like to thank Gifted by Nature, Autograph, Renaissance, the Arts Council, the Cultural Recovery Fund, and all our speakers here today, Cordell, Michael, Dr. Kumar, I know you said not to call you that, Dr. Kumar and Fusion, thank you so much. And thank you very much to Vicky Passion for the idea behind this. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. Have a great evening. Thank you.